All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the New Year Candy Strategy webinar series brought to you by Talent Board. And today we're going to be talking about measuring the ROI of talent attraction. With me today, I have two great guests who are going to be leading and taking over this webinar in just a minute. And I'm going to more formally introduce them then. We have Melissa Thompson, VP Talent Acquisition at McGraw-Hill Education, and Mari Hannigan, CEO of SparkStart, one of our generous sponsors. My name is Ron Mockamer. I'm the program manager here for global programs at Talent Board, the organization behind the Candidate Experience Awards. And I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about that first. So here, I just want to thank all of our sponsors. We are a nonprofit organization, for those of you who don't know. So we make it through with the support of our generous sponsors. Talent Board was founded in 2011 and is all about elevating and promoting a quality candidate experience. And these are all of our generous sponsors, as I said, that helped over this past year, that have been promoting this mission and this program and helping us bring you these wonderful webinars. We do research worldwide, globally, in North America, EMEA, as well as in APAC. This year's 2018 program actually kicks off in March, so there will be a lot more announcements coming soon about that, and we do hope to have your participation. The completion deadlines are listed below, so those are when the surveys end next year for the 2018 program. And here's just a look at our 2017, the scope of our research. We also give away awards, hence our name, the Candidate Experience Awards, to those companies that have the highest positive candidate ratings in our research. And we do those awards in those three regions you see right there. And that brings us to our list of winners. So here was our 2017 North American program Candy winners. Here is our list of our EMEA 2017 Candy Award winners. And lastly, our list of 2017 APAC Candy Award winners. So we had over 300 companies compete globally and over 220,000 candidate responses, which is great. And so without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Mari and Melissa, our webinar today. Thank you for joining us.
This is Melissa Thompson, and as Ron said, I am the Vice President of Talent Acquisition at McGraw-Hill Education.
And I'm Mari Hannigan, CEO of SparkStart.
So Maury and I were together at the Candy Experience Awards late last year, and while we were discussing a variety of topics, one of the things that came up was how hard it is for talent acquisition leaders to really define return on investment, or ROI, for talent attraction. So out of that conversation came this webinar. We had a lot of fun thinking through very specific ways to measure your return on your talent attraction investments. Next slide. So to start, we wanted to really look at what are the primary outcomes that a talent acquisition leader would want to impact with their attraction efforts. And we ended up deciding on really these three buckets: hires, applies, and talent community. So in the first bucket, hires, it really seems an obvious one, but some branding efforts are going to improve your EVP without showing a really direct impact all the way down the hiring funnel. Secondarily, applies is a solid outcome, as you want to make sure that your recruitment marketing efforts, at a minimum, are driving up your applies.
Right, but we want to be careful here and really look at quality of applies. I've often said I'm not impressed when people tell me they have 10,000 applications, because that tells me that they're spending money to attract people that aren't qualified, or they're not giving them the right information to opt in or opt out. So the key measure here is the quality of applications, not just more being better.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, we wanted to talk about how we develop prospects in our talent community. Like Maury just said, more is just more. So we have to temper the effort to increase our volume with ensuring that we are attracting both quality and qualified candidates.
And Melissa, I think this is one that I'm amazed to see companies that use their talent community almost as a graveyard for people who didn't get selected.
Mhm.
It's almost the consolation prize. Well, we didn't, you weren't selected for this, but please join our talent community. And the question you want to ask is your talent community really a group of people who are interested and qualified and prospects for upcoming jobs, or is it 30,000 people that you're never going to hire? And it keeps going back to quality. But looking at, are you truly building a real talent community? That tells you a lot about how well your program's doing.
Maury, I'm very fond of saying to my team that the talent community is not meant to be a library where you never check any books out. You got to check books out every once in a while. Let's go on to the next slide.
Or just to add to that, look at how often do you hire someone out of your talent community? That'll tell you if you've got a viable group there or not.
Absolutely. So that's a good lead-in to considering some metrics as we're looking at ROI. The core of whether you're really getting a return is looking at a variety of metrics to see what the impacts of your efforts might be. So in the first bucket here, we look at the metrics that relate directly to recruiters. In terms of cost per hire, I'm not really a big fan, but it's really not a bad place to start if you're trying to determine whether your job board strategy is effective. You might not go all the way to cost per hire. You might only look at cost per apply. On the other side of the coin, I'm a really strong advocate for throughput metrics, those metrics that look at the conversion rates as you move from prospect to applicant, from applicant to hiring manager review, interview, offer, and so on. If you have a really good CRM attached to your applicant tracking system, you can really track back all the way from the hire to see which sources are the best in driving the candidates that come down the funnel. And the last of the ones for the recruiters is time to fill. And I realize that time to fill makes recruiters groan, but it's one of those things that can really get away from you if you're not paying close attention. I wonder if we could investigate what the source of hire is from those roles that have the lowest time to fill. What about those that have the highest? What does that tell you, and what can you get from the data?
And digging into these numbers is really not just looking at the number, but understanding the number in context. I mean, I love the fact that you've just broken it down into 3 different buckets of what you're measuring. I see lots of people who have a lot of measures, but they don't really separate out what can the recruiter really control, what is endemic to the process, and what is really a marketing, outreach process. So all of this is being disciplined about what are you measuring, how you're measuring it, and to that put even things like your throughput metrics. That can tell you a lot about whether or not a recruiter is reaching out to the right group of people, whether the materials you're using are letting people opt in and opt out appropriately. It's not just the numbers, but really the analytics here. So I love the structure.
Thanks. That next bucket is really all about process. Those of you that have heard me speak before know that I'm a big fan of the Net Promoter Score for candidates, partly because it's a business measure and business leaders understand NPS. So when you use candidate NPS for everyone that comes on board for an interview, you can merely find out some specific information about your EVP and maybe even some insights into your talent attraction strategies. Very closely related, but sort of a different viewpoint is the hiring manager SAT metric. I know this is another one that causes recruiters to do the major eye roll, but in the current environment, at least on my teams, we're asking hiring managers to be much more involved and in terms of engaging their network and having ownership of the recruiting process.
And this is a tricky one, particularly if you're looking at hard to fill roles, or if you're doing anything on the technical side. Your hiring managers are probably connected to other people with those same technical skills or the communities that have them. So it's huge to have them involved, but the trap people run into is hiring managers start to feel like recruiters are asking them to do their jobs. And that balance where having them involved and feeling like they've got some input and some influence on the process is important, without making them feel like the whole thing's been dumped in their lap.
Mm-hmm.
So tough one to get right.
Yeah, I often tell my recruiters to go all Jerry Maguire on them. Help me, help you. The third one is one that has really blown up over the last decade, which is the reputation audit, where Glassdoor and sites like that make it a necessary practice for you to manage your organization's reputation very closely. Respond to the things that are out there, and have a strategy, a very targeted strategy for how you manage feedback or manage how you're being seen on those sites.
And let me just jump in, because there's a lot of chatter, obviously, on the Facebook groups and things about, Glassdoor is just a bunch of unhappy people who are just ranting and raving, and we need to ignore it. And there's a lot of that. There's no doubt about it. There are some folks who, they just want to hear themselves talk. But you can also find in there some legitimate complaints that you need to be sensitive to and own. And that can be tough when you're seeing people who just didn't get a job and are venting, versus somebody who really did have an experience with you that wasn't optimal. So I think buried in the negative stuff can be some very productive stuff.
Well, and I think when you're going to own that relationship and own your reputation, you have to be encouraging your own employees to go to Glassdoor and tell it like it really is. So, the one bad apple isn't able to have the negative impact if you have other employees that are excited about the culture and excited about the organization that are posting on Glassdoor.
Yep.
The last bucket of metrics is really directly related to attraction, where we split it into website analytics, where there's really just a ton of opportunities to understand what's really working for you on your website. Whether you're taking a look at monthly visitors, or the time a visitor is spending on your website, or whether, those really slick and expensive corporate videos are ever getting any views. It's important to measure that same data month over month so that you can decide what kinds of actions you're going to take.
Right, and I won't get started on the video plays. I could go on for a while. But one of the things, we've just seen some data recently that says 92% of all visitors to corporate websites come to the career posting page and never go anywhere else. That'd be an important thing to know if that's true for your site. And if it is, look at where you're putting money. If you're putting all your money on your home pages and your upfront pages, and most of your visitors are never going there, you probably want to shift some of your focus and your resources to where they're actually landing. But this is another one to dig into the numbers and see what they're really telling you. It's not just visitors. Where are they? What are they looking at? And what's happening? How many of those are converting and so forth? There's really rich data there if you're willing to dive into it.
Yeah. The last piece is really around social media, and to me it's a tricky one to understand whether it's really giving you any return on your investment. At a minimum, you can start looking at your followers and whether there's growth in your followers as you make take different actions on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter. But you can also use your CRM to understand whether you're gaining prospects from that monthly Twitter chat that you host, or whether if you're really tracking the right metrics, you'll be able to see whether candidates are arriving at your website from these different social media platforms and whether they're making it successfully into the funnel. Next slide. Okay. Every day, it seems like there's a new opportunity to try some new talent attraction tool, and you can't just go after every shiny object that's put in front of you. So here's what we're going to suggest. What if you try one thing every quarter? And it's tough because it's already February, and your budget for the year is probably already set. But just a thought as you look at 2019, could you tuck money into the budget that is just for this type of experimentation? If you can, make some shifts in this year and figure out what you're going to be able to experiment with. And then don't just try anything. Align your pilots with what your talent acquisition strategy really is. So if you are having a strategy that's relating to improving candidate experience, or streamlining your systems, or building critical talent pools. You need to pick the tools that are going to help drive your strategy.
And let me add, you also want to be really purposeful in picking the group or the people that you have do the experiment. If you're looking at, a new tool for sourcing, give it to some busy sourcers and see if the tool really works in the workflow and with the kind of volume that you've got going. Don't use it for a special one-off or, oh, we've got this special situation, let's try it here. It's really important that you use it truly in the field, in the way things are actually going. And that goes with the people you choose as well. Don't give it to your most enthusiastic, most conscientious person who can make anything work, or give it to your biggest curmudgeon group who doesn't like anything. Try to find a realistic environment in which to try it, because when we get to talking about, actually rolling things out and adopting them, if you haven't really tested it in a realistic environment, you're going to just trip over all kinds of adoption problems. So thinking through, not only does this tool align with what our strategy, but does it align with the workflow and the things we're doing here, and are we going to have good information when we're done?
Mm-hmm. So we actually wanted to make a suggestion that AI for scheduling might be an interesting spot to experiment if you're looking at ways to improve the candidate experience for interviewing. Artificial intelligence is a hot topic. AI for scheduling has a fairly low barrier for entry, but also this could free up your coordinators to be able to do a little more of that personalization of the candidate experience. If they're not spending all their time chasing down the schedule for the interview, maybe now they will have time to meet and greet the candidate, spend time with the candidate during the day, and then give that kind of feedback to their recruiters. Finally, I had this crazy idea. What if we started backwards and actually started meeting people in person again, instead of everything being, arm's length behind LinkedIn or Facebook or, whichever of the tools that we're using. So maybe you could schedule good old-fashioned meetups in key cities for prospects that have been in your talent community. Or maybe you could pull a food truck up in front of your competitor's headquarters. And you can use these events to create real connections with your prospective candidates. But in order for any of these tactics in person to succeed, there has to be follow-up by the recruiter or the sourcer to update the candidate record, to make notes of personal things they found out about the candidates that they met in person, and then they have to develop some sort of a keep warm strategy after the in-person event in order to make this a useful return on investment of both time and money.
Never underestimate the value of free food.
Right? Next slide. Okay, we think that evaluation really goes hand in hand with experiment, and we wanted to give you some thoughts on how you might evaluate the success of your experiments. To start, just have a really clear timeline for the pilot. Don't go into a pilot with an indefinite end date. We think 90 days is generally a good time frame, and during that 90 days, you need to have a methodology to keep track of who's using the tool and how it's performing. And in order for that data to be helpful for you, you have to really have a good idea of what success looks like. What are you expecting from this particular experiment? And then during the 90 days, have a regular cadence for review.
I'm amazed to see people who will do pilots and haven't ever defined, what is success? Either what numbers are we trying to hit? What exactual behaviors are we trying to see? How are we going to know if this works? And what you want at the end of the pilot is to either be able to say, yes, I've got good solid data. I'm prepared to go to my management and say we need to, adopt or roll out this new thing because here's the business case. We know it works. We've tried it in our environment, and look, we've got solid data. Or in good conscience, you can say, nope, we've tried this. We've tried it fairly, and it's not right for us. We're going to shut this one down, and we're going to walk away. But you need that kind of definitive conclusion, not just, well, let's try it and see how it goes. We're just going to, sort of kick the tires on this one. That's not a good use of anybody's resources. But when you have really well-defined outcomes of what is, go, no-go decision, then you get some really valuable information and data out of all this.
Excellent. Next slide, please. So the last of the 4 things that we wanted to talk about is adoption. So your pilot was a huge success. Now what do you do? As Maury and I talked about this cycle of experiment, evaluate, and measure, we really thought, you know, the value of the investment can be lost because that new tool or system or process ends up not getting adopted. So we added this last step in order to encourage leaders to have a clear adoption strategy.
And it's something, before you start a pilot, sort of think about, is this something that if the pilot's successful, that we're prepared to adopt? You know, it may be just, you know, in a business unit, it may be just US, it may be globally. But if the cost of the tool is prohibitive, then don't spend your time and resources testing it if you're not ever going to go with it. If your compliance issues are just too messy and complicated, you don't think you'll ever get it in, you ideally want to have, you're going to move yourself forward by doing these experiments and being prepared to commit to adopting things and even understanding what that would look like and how you do that and making sure you've got time in your calendar to do that. That's all part of this decision about what to pilot and what not to pilot.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So have a structured adoption plan. As we said, design those success metrics, and then really publicly recognizing early adopters makes a difference. I can recall a technical job board that we tried at Citrix, and we had 2 of the engineering recruiters using the job board, and quite honestly, they didn't like it. And they came to me and said, you know, we've been using it for 30 days, and I know we had scheduled a 90-day trial, but can we stop now? We were like, okay, let's turn that off. It's part of that fail fast mentality that we talked about on the last slide. The other thing is we've had some really great things that we experimented with and implemented for LinkedIn, because it's one of the most expensive tools that are out there. I adopted a use it or lose it policy, so recruiters and sourcers knew if they were not regularly using the tool that they were likely to have to hand over their access to someone else. And when we first started doing that, people thought that's not fair. While fair is nice, I want to make sure that I'm getting the return out of this investment. And then the last example is really putting a new applicant tracking system in place. And once you have the ATS in place, just ensuring that hiring managers, recruiters, recruiting managers, everyone that's using the system 90 days after go live is still engaged with the system, using it as you have it planned, because otherwise another one of your huge investments is going to waste.
We see it with CRMs and talent communities all the time, where recruiters still keep, you know, that list in their desk or, you know, on their private Excel sheet because they want to hang on to their own leads and so forth. If you're going to make the investment, you want to make sure that the organization's getting the return for it. So if people are only half-heartedly using it, if they haven't really embraced it, if they're only using a third of the features, you're not really getting your money's worth. And there can be lots of reasons for that, but this goes back to sort of having your metrics going in and in some degree, talking to people. You know, it's great that your recruiters came back and said the technical job board wasn't working. Sometimes when they're asked to test something, they feel like they have to make it work, or it's going to feel like they failed. And so it says a lot about the kind of, you know, honesty and trust you've got in an organization, that people can come back and go, you know what, this really isn't all it's cranked up to be, and we need to cut our losses and move on. So
absolutely,
great environment to do that
in. Last slide. So we've really talked through 4 key ways that you can define the return on investment of your talent attraction strategy. We didn't really call out a lot of specific things that you could experiment and test with, and that's on purpose, because you have to pull the things to test based on the pillars of your strategy. So if you're not sure of what things you want to test, I suggest you do something wild and crazy, like post something on your LinkedIn profile and say, hey, we want to do this kind of a pilot. What do you guys suggest? And I would bet your network is going to come back with a ton of ideas. Maury and I want to thank you so much for your time, and we hope that this webinar has been helpful in getting you to think about ways to measure the ROI of your talent strategy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maury and Melissa. That was awesome. I really loved how you guys were able to kind of summarize it in those 4 key ways to define the ROI. So I thought that was great. Remember, everyone, if you do have any questions, everyone's contact information is right here. So please feel free to reach out directly with any questions at all. And then, like I said, a webinar recording will be sent out tomorrow as well. So you will get access to all of these again. So just want to say thank you again, everyone. Thank you to our presenters. Feel free to reach out with questions, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.